On Saturday night when I came back from leading worship, my wife and I talked briefly, and she said, every time you end up at St. John Defiance, it's always before something like big occurs or after. So the first time I was here, it was right before I began summer Hebrew, which learning a language is always very difficult, especially the older you get. And then the next time was when school has been starting, another big event. And then, of course, this week when we had our son on Monday. So I'm a little worried about when I come here next if something would happen. Hopefully it'll be like the Browns win the Super Bowl or the Buckeyes win a championship. So I'll take that over anything else. But very thankful to be here and thankful for her mother and her that they're able to watch him and for me to be here. And so when I called Pastor Muse on Tuesday explaining what was going on, I could hear a pin drop. I'm like, they told me I should go. I kind of worked on the sermon. I had the sermon done. And then, of course, when we had Callan on Monday, he came early, but he's doing fine. Looking at him, it kind of changed the sermon and changed a lot of things. Because as I looked at him and I looked at his hands, and I'm not going to choke up. Usually I've been choking up because I've done this a few times. So I'm like, don't choke up. I look at his hands, and he's grabbed my fingers, and I see his hands and his grip, and I think, man, looking up at the TV too, I could see, like, you could be a quarterback one day. I can't wait to teach you how to throw a spiral. And looking up at the thing, I'm like, see Aaron Rodgers, and I'm like, you could be a quarterback as good as Aaron Rodgers. And then a couple plays later, I'm thinking, you might be a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers, especially right now. So I'll let the Jets know you're available if they need one. But not just how to be a quarterback or how to hunt or fish or any other things like that. I'm looking forward to teaching my son a lot of the lessons that are going on in life. And in today's gospel lesson, Peter comes before Jesus and asks him a pretty big question. And we see Jesus right off the bat focuses on handling it God's way versus the world's way. Because when we handle conflict and everything, we have God's way and then we have the world's way. Because when the conflict happens in the world, they kind of say, yeah, but, put them off to the side, don't do it, worry about it. Versus what God tells us to do. And so I invite you to look at page 3 if you'd like, as we kind of work our way through this. And we see in verse 21, Peter coming up to Jesus and says, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? I want you to think about that. So Peter's coming to Jesus and asking him, what should I do when my brother, those I care about, or even fellow Christian or anyone comes and sins against me? We give Peter a bad rap because he throws out this number 7, right? 7 times. And as I'm looking at this and thinking of my son, I'm thinking of one day my son coming to me and say, Dad, someone hurt me. And he explains the situation. What should I do? Should I forgive him? And part of me right now, being that I'm not even a week old as a father, I'd be like, no, don't forget, just cut him out of your life. Don't be around someone that hurts you, right? Or if it's a family member or a close friend and they've hurt you maybe a second time, it's okay. We love giving second chances, don't we? We love giving second chances. Or if they're family or a super close friend or it wasn't their fault, maybe 3 times. But what's the saying go? 3 times you're out, right? It's hard for me to imagine telling my son to forgive someone 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. Think in your own life right now when someone has hurt you and they ask for forgiveness, or you have hurt someone else and you ask for forgiveness. Once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Can you imagine saying to one person, I forgive you, I forgive you, Eventually, do you think you get tired and be like, I don't forgive you? You're making the same mistake. You're making different mistakes. So we give Peter a bad rap for throwing out 7, but let's be honest, that's probably 5 or 6 more times than we ourselves have given others. And so Peter comes to Jesus, which is great because too often when we hurt someone, we go to the world. My degree initially is in psychology. I've actually been at the conference that Pastor Muse is talking about, is at right now. It's an amazing conference. And majoring in psychology, I've read lots of books where they talk about how to forgive someone, how it works, and they all approach it from a worldly perspective, meaning this. When someone hurts you, you go, you can forgive them. They say you're sorry. You're like, okay. Then you're supposed to look for like contrition to make sure they're sad about it. Then you're supposed to maybe, if you've hurt someone or they've hurt you, they're supposed to say how they're going to make it right. And then you're supposed to see if they follow through on that. And then if they follow through on that, then you can forgive them. Sounds very worldly, doesn't it? Sounds practical. But that's not the advice that Jesus gives Peter. So Peter throws out this number 7. We see in verse 22 right there, you can read it, it says, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. So Jesus takes this notion of forgiveness and has effectively transformed it. We know that 70 times 7, if you've heard before, kind of means to infinity, but also it gives us some extra layers. So what's Jesus telling us about forgiveness? He's telling us about 4 things right away. First off, he's telling us to Jesus, forgiveness is not limited. It's unlimited, which is a very strange thing to say, isn't it? That forgiveness is unlimited. When someone that has hurt you to your core, you're to forgive them over and over again. It doesn't seem right, but that's what Jesus is telling us right then and there. Additionally, Jesus is telling us that his forgiveness is for all. It's not for those who, the ones that are good people. It's for all people, especially those that have hurt us. Those who have fallen short need to hear the forgiveness of God. And so we look at what he said. He said, first off, forgiveness is not limited. Okay, then he goes, forgiveness is for all. Next, as we look at this verse, it kind of teaches us that Jesus' forgiveness empowers us to forgive others. That is the foundational piece. I can teach my sons lots of things. Okay, used to coach basketball, played a lot of sports, I'm fairly handy and things like that. So I can teach him lots of things, but I cannot teach him forgiveness. Because the only one who can teach forgiveness is Christ. Christ is the one that teaches us forgiveness. He demonstrated forgiveness for us because on that cross, he forgave us. As good of a dad as I'll try to be, I will fall short. And that is why when it comes to forgiveness, don't use me as an example, use Christ. Because only through Christ and his forgiveness are we able to forgive others. That is the foundation we build upon. And finally, by this little phrase, Jesus is setting up the power and the magnitude of what will occur on the cross. The cross is so powerful that you can forgive someone over and over and over again. It's so powerful it should be your only source of forgiveness. Not a self-help book, not your own wisdom, not the world or advice from a friend, but Christ alone and him crucified is the source of all things. And so in that one sentence, Jesus says a lot. And if you're like me and the disciples, they probably are like, okay, 7, what? And so Jesus comes through a parable. And it's a great parable, and the kids did a great job. So we're going to unpack it just a little bit more as well. And we see, first off, there's a king, right? And a king is responsible for many things. One of which is the physical responsibility of the kingdom. Making sure there's enough money, okay? And so there is a servant who owes, and you can see right there it says 10,000 talents. And you might think 10,000, that's not a bad number. You know what I mean? It's a lot, but what does that mean? So when I was looking in a commentary, they kind of do math for inflation. And that's one thing I will not be teaching my son. I'm very bad at math. I'm blessed my wife is amazing at math. And so I was looking at that. I'm going 10,000, inflation. Basically what this would be is this. You would need to win the Powerball once and a second time to have any chance of paying back 10,000. How likely is that to happen? No. It's not going to happen. Maybe it happens once. But now you got to double down and win the Powerball twice. That is the amount of debt that this servant owes the king. If that doesn't sound a little familiar to our relationship with God, it should. We owe him a huge debt. Our sin has carried us and separated us from God. My son is less than a week old, and even though I look at him and I think in his perfect hands and feet and all of this thing, I know that he is sinful and separated from the love of God. And I'm not just talking about it when I have to change his diaper, okay? He is a sinful being like you and me. And that is a debt no matter what great things he does, no matter what great things I do or you do, that never can be repaid, no matter what. If God held us accountable to our sins, we would fall short. And so this servant comes to the king. And it's interesting, see what he does. He falls to his knees, imploring him. Very interesting word. Have patience with me. I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master released the servant and forgave his debt. The king knew that there was no chance that this servant was going to pay his money back. There's no chance that we can earn our forgiveness. We can earn anything to God because we have sinned and fallen short. And so, like the king, God forgives us. And so what are we to do with this forgiveness? We look at what the servant does. The servant goes out and he finds someone that owes him, it says right there, 100 denarii. The best way to describe 100 denarii is, after leading service, I went to McDonald's and I ordered the double cheeseburger combo meal. It was like $9. That is how much money that servant owed. $9 maybe. Not even a full 10. $9. A McDonald's value meal is what was owed to him. So he goes and asks, and the servant says the same thing that he himself had said. And what was his result? He choked him. He demanded repayment. He threw him in prison to get that repayment. That servant had received forgiveness and love from the king. And when given the opportunity to use that as a foundation to forgive others, he fell away. He cared more about those $10. Because, right, the world says you're supposed to get what you're owed, right? That's what the world says. Get what you're owed. If someone hurts you, you can hurt them back maybe. Or make sure you get yours. And so hearing that, we see later on that the fellow servants went to the king and they told him what was going on. The king summoned him and he said, "You wicked servant." Another translation, I looked in that, it says evil. You evil. You took the grace, the love, the mercy given to you. And when given the opportunity to do it with someone else, you repaid it with pure evil. And it was only $10. It was a McDonald's value menu. That was it. And so the king then threw him to the jailers until his debt should be paid, knowing that debt will never be paid. And so I want to spend the rest of this time looking on verse 35. Because verse 35 is where the linchpin of this teaching kind of really ramps it up. And looking at the commentaries and other sermons and things, they focused a lot on this verse and specifically one word. So let's read this, or I'll read this to you. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. We get the word heart. In Greek, it's cardia. So we get cardiac, obviously, from that word. And then you have a cardiac surgeon, talks about your heart. So when my son was born, you're waiting for that scream to know everything's okay. And I'm just like, I don't know how long to wait. This is my first child, so I'm waiting. Then he screams. I'm like, okay. Then they start cleaning him off and everything. And they take him over here. And the first thing the nurses does, they get their stethoscope out and they put it on their heart. And immediately I'm thinking of my really good friend Trevor and his son. When his son was born, he had a hole in his heart. And he had to go through multiple surgeries. And so I'm just worried that something's going to be wrong with his heart. Thankfully, nothing is. But every time the nurses came in, and on Friday when we went to the doctors, they do the same thing. They put the stethoscope on and put it on, listen to his heart. Because if there is a problem with his heart, can he live? No. Our life comes from our heart. That is where it comes from. And so that is what God is saying when we are to forgive one another. It must come from our heart. that gives us life. As great as medical technology is, I was reading, they said we can create an artificial heart, which is fascinating. It can still only work 70% as well as a human heart. Think about that. We can try to do it. The world is like maybe 70% good as forgiveness, but God is 100%. And so when we are to forgive from our heart. The piece of us that gives us our life. And remember, it's not us forgiving. It's us reflecting and sharing what God has given us. And so we look to the cross, and we see the cross. And on the cross, we see Jesus' heart. And what occurred on the cross in Jesus' heart? He died. His heart stopped. His blood flowed so you could be forgiven. So my son could be forgiven. So I could be forgiven. His heart upon the cross died for you. So you could be forgiven and restored to God. But it didn't end there. We have to remember that he died, but it never ended with his death, because he rose again. He ascended to heaven and sits at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty. Kind of sound familiar? We're going to say that. And he's there for God, reminding God for us. So when we sin and we fall short, Jesus is there saying, my heart died for them. And so when we have these instances with our brothers, and it's not brothers because it's really a general term too, it can really be anyone. When we have those issues with anyone and we need to forgive them, we need to reflect the heart of Christ that we see upon the cross to others. Because when we do that, we share the love of Christ that was given to us not because we were great, but because we were forgiven by God. And we were loved, and we put our faith in him alone, not in the world. And so, as we go through this life, and you go through this week, I have no doubt you're going to run into someone that has hurt you. I think as I was writing this, I was reflecting upon someone that I had hurt, and we kind of became frenemies, because when you hurt someone, what do they usually do back? They hurt you, and you keep doing that and that. And it wasn't until we talked and we forgave one another did that relationship be restored. You're going to have that opportunity this week with someone, I have no doubt. Either you're going to get hurt or you're going to hurt someone else. If not this week, soon. Or in the past, you've been hanging on. That is where we're to take the forgiveness given to us upon the cross by Christ and to let it change our heart. So we are not that wicked servant. Because that wicked servant, when he pleaded, his heart never changed. His heart was wicked, evil. Our heart, when we forgive, should reflect the love of Christ given to us freely. And so we forgive others. So I'll teach my son a lot of things. I'm looking forward to it. And one of the things I hope to teach him is that when you do make a mistake, when someone hurts you, and it's hard for me to think of that, like him crying, and it's like it almost makes me angry and sad at the same time, saying, Dad, they hurt me, what should I do? I need to remember the cross and what Christ did for me and for him. And that love, I'd be like, needs to be reflected in our hearts. And I'll say, forgive them. Well, they did it again, forgive them. They did it again, forgive them. I don't know. I'm like, forgive them. Because guess what? God forgave you through Christ and his sacrifice alone. Because you didn't do anything. You were a cute baby. I probably have 500 pictures on my phone already of him. But it's not because of that. It's because you are a child of God. You put your faith in him alone. That is why you're forgiven. And you better reflect that as you interact with others to share the love of Christ. And so as we go through this week, let us remember Christ's heart upon the cross. And let that love be reflected in us and turn fully back to the cross. Amen.